Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Positive Medium podcast. In this episode, I wanted to talk about communication with guides and higher beings, spirit team, you might call it. Everyone kind of has their own different way of putting that. But honestly, I'm unsure of where to begin with it because, I feel like this is such an important topic because so many people get caught up in how this type of communication works, as I know I did in the beginning. So I found mediumship is easier to trust in that the messages we get can be validated by the person receiving the reading in real time. But communication with our spirit team is harder to trust because we don't have proof that it's working. And this is where I think a lot of people struggle. So, in the moment, we might feel like we are communicating with our guides, but afterwards, the mind can kick in and convince us that we made it up. I know that that's what would happen with me at least, and I don't think I was alone in that. Um, in the beginning, I was very much skeptical, healthily skeptical about all of the things that I couldn't prove. And I still am, but I've been able to open myself up more over time to trusting what my guides are bringing forward for me. Um, I want to stress that this isn't something that happened overnight. I'm 3 years, just over 3 years into my mediumship journey, and it's only really this last year that I've been really fully able to lean into trusting what I'm receiving from my spirit team. Um, I have been communicating with them this whole time, but I have been questioning myself and questioning the communication after the fact. Um, as I said, mediumship came easier for me because when it comes to trust, I was able to get that feedback and that helped me to trust what I was receiving. Um, so I suppose a good place to start is what the communication looks like for me. And this is so different for everyone. And I know in the beginning, I was listening to any kind of tutors or whoever on the likes of YouTube to see what they had to say about their communication. But it's quite hard to find somebody who talks about how it looks for them. Now, it looks different for everyone, but I still would have found it really helpful to hear what it looked like, what it sounded like, what it felt like. So I might have some kind of idea of how I can look for the communication. And I wished that more people would share what it looked like. Um, so at the start, I was very much focused on what my guide would look like. And I'm someone who's always struggled with the visual side of things. So that was very difficult for me. Um, I guess in my head, if I couldn't see them, then it wasn't working or I wasn't doing it right. That kind of threw me off. Um, I'd feel like I had an idea of what they looked like, and then a few weeks later it would change. And so I felt really unsure about the whole guide relationship that I thought I had been building. I found that the only time I had to be able to make a connection without distractions was while I was in bed before going to sleep. So I would focus on feeling into my own energy. And when I felt comfortable in that I could feel my own energy clearly, um, you get that kind of buzzy or tingly kind of feeling, um, or just kind of a hypersensitive awareness around your body. Um, at that point, I would ask my team to step forward, to come in close, and over time, I was able to feel them come in, but not in the beginning. So I thought that because I have a very prominent inner monologue, that this is how they would communicate. So I would ask questions in my head. And sometimes I would get very simple answers that sounded like my own voice. And in mediumship, I know that spirit can communicate in this way. And it does sound like your own voice because they're using your mind to communicate. But when it came to guides, it felt too much like it could be my own mind making it up. But still, in the moment, I would do my best to trust what I was getting. All of the questioning of it came after. So I'm just trying my best to trust in the moment. And this worked for a little while, but I knew, and I think they knew, that this wasn't enough for my mind to trust and accept as real. Um, I got to the point where I was feeling like I was wasting time um, by questioning so much, but I didn't know how to stop. Um, so it's around this time that I started to feel my guides. Um, so in mediumship, I realized quite quickly that clairsentience was my strongest clair. So I found it so much easier to feel into the spirit person, who they were and what they wanted to say. So my guides must have been aware of that too. They would have been. And they began bringing that into our communications. So when I would get settled and call them in, like I said before, I would start to feel them come in, instead of just trying to guess whether or not they're there. At first, it felt like a little bit of a kind of a whoosh of energy coming close to my own energy. And this felt more tangible and easier to trust for me because I didn't feel like I would be able to make up this feeling. So, I would just call them in and I would just sit with them as I lay there falling asleep. And this went on for a while, and I started to notice that I'd get flashes of images. Um, like I haven't fallen asleep, but I'm getting these flashes of images. And it felt like my mind had wandered, but then I would realize that these were visuals. And knowing that I'm not someone who can do visuals, I was then able to trust that these images and visuals were from my guides. I knew that I could trust them because I could not draw up those visuals by myself if I had tried. So I was starting to have very vivid dreams. Um, I was able to easily find meaning in these dreams for situations in my everyday life. And I started to think that my guides were communicating with me in dreams, where my mind is more receptive and a little less skeptical. And this was confirmed for me by two separate dreams where I was visited by a loved one, and then a higher being. And both of them appeared as like blue white orbs. Oh, they were beautiful. They were so bright, these just big orbs in front of me, and they were communicating with me telepathically. Um, and these dreams helped me to realize that I didn't need to worry about what my guides looked like because in reality they didn't have a body. They're pure energy. And so that was around the time that I stopped looking for them as a person and accepted them for the energy consciousness that they are. Um, and also the two separate dreams being so similar helped me to have that trust in them, that they weren't just a dream. It felt a little bit too coincidental, that they were both the same. And then also previously, years ago, I had had a similar dream by a loved one who visited me, a separate loved one, who visited me as this blue white orb. So it felt like a theme that I could trust. Um, Now, apart from my nightly meetings with spirit, I was obviously living a very normal life. I've two children to take care of, a house to keep, bills to pay, and all of that comes with its own roller coaster of emotions and challenges. Um, I found myself more and more looking to my guides and asking for help with this and that and the other. And sometimes I'd feel guilty for asking them for help all the time, but I was always met with a sensation or a feeling of, don't be silly, that they're here to help and guide me in any way that they can for my highest good. So I would ask them, and I would notice all of the little ways that they would show up for me. This might be a sign that I chose, so I would know they were around, showing up in all these different places. That was just one example. Um, it was coincidences that came about that helped to make my life a little bit easier. Sometimes it was friendly advice or intuitive nudges. Um, Once, going through a very difficult time in my life, I was at a loss for how to pull myself out of the depths and feel better. And I knew I wanted to feel better and look on the bright side, but I didn't know how to. And I had this sudden urge to decorate. I have this craft room where in the house where I keep all my crafty things that I like to make. And I was going to paint the craft room. And I had so much going on at the time, and I was so busy, and there was so much going on that it felt silly to put that pressure on myself too. Because it would be painting while the kids are in bed and I was already exhausted. But before I knew it, I'd put my kids to bed and I was preparing the room to paint. This motivation just seemed to come from nowhere. Um, I was laying out old newspaper to put the roller tray on, and I asked in my head, why am I doing this? And as I laid down the newspaper, I saw printed in big bold writing on the newspaper, "It is good for the soul." And I laughed and knew instantly that that was a message from my guides, and they were right. Um, that was this intuitive nudge to do something that was going to help me through whatever I was going through. And they were right. It was actually the best thing that I think I ever could have done, because suddenly I had a week straight of putting the kids to bed and shutting myself in that room with a good podcast on where I could just be. Um, and it really did pull me out of the depths. And I suddenly found then that I moved on to another route. I was enjoying it so much. It was so good for me. Um, so that's just another example of how they communicated with me. So over time, my communication with my guides has evolved, and I think it's always evolving. I think it's always changing. Um, it started to be that I would quiet my mind at night time and call them in, and I would instantly feel them. As I said before, it started as a whoosh of energy, and then it started to become a tingling on my cheeks, and then it settled to a feeling right on the top of my crown. Um, it's difficult to describe, but if I was to try, I would say it's almost like fuzzy feeling in my head, while at the same time feeling a fullness in my head. And again, mostly I would just lay there enjoying the feeling of having them close by. And sometimes they would give me visuals. I suppose you could call them like visions. It might like a little scene might play out. But they were always very personal and relevant to me. And I knew that I could trust them because again, I would not have been able to visualize that thing if I tried to. Even now, if I think about one of them, I cannot bring up the visual. It's just not something that I can do. Um, I would still ask questions from time to time, and I'd receive answers that still sounded like my own voice. Once I remember feeling really down and lonely. And as I called them in, I was very needy and I was asking them to please show me that they're close by. Please give me some more proof that they're here. Um, and I fell asleep and I dreamt that I was at some type of event. And I decided that I should leave this event. And I exited through these double doors into a quiet hallway. And in the hallway, there was loads and loads of the most beautiful golden butterflies fluttering around. Um, there were so many, but one group of them caught my eye. And when I saw them, I knew them. Like I knew their soul. I knew who they were. And I held out my arm just kind of instinctively. I put my arm out, and some of them from that group came and landed on my arm. And as soon as they touched me, I was just overcome by this emotion. Tears were filling my eyes and my throat caught like I was going to cry. Um, and it was just so overwhelming. As soon as they landed on me, I knew in my heart that this was my family. It was my spirit family. And I'd forgotten how much I missed them until they touched me. Um, it really, really was the most beautiful dream. And when I woke up, I knew that they had come to show me that I wasn't alone, um, which was really, really beautiful. Um, so only recently, my communication with my team has evolved again. One evening, I was sitting in my living room and I decided to make the connection while it was quiet. So I called them in, and I was quite surprised to suddenly be told that there was 9 of them there. and I asked them to give me some kind of physical sign that they were near because I'm ever the skeptic. Um, and I was just sort of guided to hold out my hand. Again, it's just this intuitive nudge of I just get this idea that I should hold my hand out. Um, so I held my hand out, and after a few moments, it sort of felt like it was tingling. And this feeling started off quite subtle and ended up being quite intense, more of a vibration than a tingle. And it continued for about 20 minutes. And I just sat there enjoying the sensation and I suppose the presence of the guides that were there. And then I decided that I wanted to ask them questions. So I started to use that inner monologue of mine to ask them my questions. And I was quite surprised when they answered in my own inner monologue voice that there was an easier way. Because normally I just get an answer, however vague it might be, it's normally an answer. So this time they were telling me that there is a better way, an easier way. Um, they said that I didn't need to use words, that they don't need words when they communicate. So I asked them how I should do it, and they replied with energy. And with that reply, that very short with energy that they spoke, I had this sort of download of information that showed me I could ask them questions by feeling the question instead of formulating the words. So I started to try this out, and it started off to be it felt complicated because I knew what I wanted to say. I could feel what I wanted to say, but my mind was trying to put it into words. So trying to send off the question without actually formulating the words seemed kind of difficult. But I quickly realized that it was actually a lot easier than trying to formulate the words because we already feel what we want to say, and then we have to try and vocabularize, if that's the right word, to put that question across. Um, I realized in doing this that the questions I had been asking seemed so like small and meaningless, when I could easily be putting across the feeling of what I was thinking. And it seemed like I was getting a more rounded question put across. So I would feel what I wanted to know and let that go and send it off. And then I started to, so at first I want to say that I would send that off and then I would just sit with my clear mind. I would just sit. And at first it felt like nothing was really happening. But that's when I started to get these replies that weren't words. They were a mixture of visuals, knowings, and feelings coming back to me in a way that would answer my question. And I knew that I wasn't making it up because I was not purposely trying to fill the answer. I think in the very beginning, sometimes we can almost accidentally fill an answer in just because of that sheer want of an answer. Um, but I knew that I wasn't doing that. I was just waiting. I was just no expectations and I was just waiting, and then I would start to get these answers. Um, and honestly, I felt like I'd been doing it for maybe 20 minutes. Um, but it just seemed that I picked it up so quickly. It just seemed so easy. It seemed so much easier than asking questions in words. But I'd started to feel tired. So I said goodnight, and like I said, it felt like it was about 20 minutes, but when I suppose signed off, or whatever you might want to call it, I looked at the clock and over an hour had passed. So I found that interesting how I had been doing it for so long and didn't even realize the time that had passed. Um, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this experience and I was really excited to try it again. And since then, this is how our communications have been. So I still get the feelings in my head when I call them in. And now I make a point of sending out my little energy questions or feelings, and I'm receiving replies in the same way. It's hard to break the habit of not asking questions with words, and sometimes I find myself slipping back into that, but that's okay. their patient. You know, our guides are there to help us in whatever it is that we're doing. But I can see now how the communication is a lot like mediumship communications, and it makes sense now that I know how this communication could work. It makes sense that it would be like mediumship. So their replies come through in the same way that I receive messages and evidence during mediumship readings using the clairs. Um, and it makes sense now that I look at it that this is how they would communicate with me. And it just seems so much easier than grappling with words to express myself to them and for them to communicate back with me, you know? So they've told me that ideally this is how everyone would communicate, really making use of those extra senses that we all have. And I'm obviously aware that the clairs show up in a variety of different ways for everyone, but I believe the basis of this communication would be very similar for everyone. And so, to summarize, communication with our guides and spirit team can be so varied and it can look so different for everyone. But as long as we're open enough to let it unfold as it will and not restrict it in any way, it can really expand to places that you couldn't even comprehend. I couldn't imagine what my relationship with my team might look like if I had restricted it to being able to see what they looked like before moving on with building that relationship, because I never would have gotten there. Um, and to this day, I have an idea of what they look like, but I don't see them when they come in. I don't see my guides. Um, so I knew that I was to share this as honestly as I could, because I feel that it could be helpful for people who might be struggling to make that connection or to trust it, which is what I struggled with in the beginning. And I really hope that someone out there can take something from this, understanding that this is my own individual experience. And, you know, sometimes only one or two things will resonate with us from other people's experiences, and that's okay. I'm so grateful for my spirit team, and I trust that I have been nudged to share this information for a reason. Um, so, like I said, I really hope that somebody was able to take anything from this. And please put a comment below if you have any comments about this or any questions you'd like to ask. Um, just leave a comment down below. And thanks everybody for listening.